A racist cop assaults a black doctor over her cultural face tattoos, but when he discovers her husband is someone with powerful ties to the system, he's utterly shocked. This explosive moment of prejudice and unexpected truth shines a harsh light on systemic bias and abuse of power. Have you ever faced or witnessed a situation where someone's identity turned everything upside down? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to share where you're watching from. Subscribe to our channel to ensure you don't miss more inspiring stories like this one. Dr. Farchi Doctor. Maya Carter, a dedicated physician with cultural tattoos etched across her face, drove home after an exhausting 18-hour shift. Her thoughts were clouded by fatigue, but the promise of rest kept her focused on the quiet road ahead. Suddenly, flashing red and blue lights filled her rearview mirror. Her heart sank as she pulled over. A police cruiser stopped behind her, and a tall officer approached. "License and registration," the officer barked without preamble. His name tag read, Jack Harris. Maya handed over her documents, her voice steady despite the sinking feeling in her chest. "What's the issue, officer?" "You were speeding," Harris replied bluntly, though he hadn't even checked her information. His eyes locked onto the tattoos on her face, his expression shifting to one of thinly veiled contempt. "Interesting artwork," he remarked, a sneer creeping into his tone. "What gang do you belong to?" Maya straightened in her seat, keeping her tone calm but firm. "They're cultural, officer. They have nothing to do with gangs." Harris leaned closer to her window, his flashlight aimed at her face. "Cultural? Sure. Funny how culture always looks like trouble to me." Maya's jaw tightened. "I've done nothing wrong. I'd appreciate it if you treated me with respect." "Respect?" Harris scoffed. His smirk turned into a glare. "You think you're above the law because you've got some fancy degree. Step out of the car." "Why?" Maya asked, her voice sharp now. "I said step out!" Harris barked, yanking the door open. Reluctantly, Maya got out, her pulse quickening. Harris stood uncomfortably close, his towering frame radiating hostility. "People like you," he said, his voice dripping with disdain, "always think the rules don't apply." "That's not true," Maya replied, struggling to keep her composure. Harris grabbed her arm roughly. "Don't talk back," he growled, shoving her against the car. "Let go of me," Maya protested, twisting in his grip. "Stop resisting," Harris yelled, though she wasn't. His fist came down hard, striking her cheek. The impact sent pain shooting through her face. Maya reeled but managed to push him back with all her strength. "You can't do this!" Harris responded with another blow, this time aiming at the tattoos on her cheek. "You need to learn your place," he hissed. Maya fought back, kicking at his shin and trying to break free, but his grip was unrelenting. Around them, a few bystanders had stopped, their phones raised as they recorded the assault. "Leave her alone!" someone shouted from the growing crowd. Harris turned briefly, his face twisted in anger, but he didn't relent. He shoved Maya to the ground, her head hitting the pavement. "Consider this your warning," he spat, his voice low and venomous. Breathing heavily, he turned and walked back to his cruiser. The car screeched away, leaving Maya lying on the cold asphalt. Her face throbbed, her body trembling from the shock and pain. She pushed herself up slowly, wincing as she touched the side of her face where his punches had landed. The crowd murmured around her, some offering words of concern, but she could barely register them. As she staggered to her feet, something shiny on the ground caught her eye. It was a police badge, likely dropped by Harris in the chaos. She picked it up, turning it over in her hand. Above his name, J. Harris, was a crest, a symbol she didn't recognize but couldn't shake the feeling it meant something ominous. Clutching the badge, Maya made her way back to her car, her mind racing. This wasn't just about a traffic stop gone wrong. There was something deeper behind his actions, something she needed to uncover. As she started her car and drove away, her resolve hardened. Harris had crossed a line, and Maya wasn't going to let him get away with it. Maya pushed open the emergency room doors, her steps unsteady. Her face throbbed with every heartbeat, the bruises already forming under her skin. A nurse approached, but before she could speak, Maya blurted out, "I was attacked." A police officer. As she was led to a treatment room, her phone buzzed. She ignored it, too overwhelmed to think about anything other than the violent encounter. Moments later, Ethan Carter, her husband, stormed in, his expression a mix of worry and barely contained fury. "What happened?" he demanded, his voice tight. His eyes scanned her swollen face, and his fists clenched. Maya recounted the assault, her words halting but precise. "He kept calling my tattoos gang signs," she said, her voice trembling. "Then he hit me, said it was a warning." Ethan paced the small room, running his hand through his hair. "Unbelievable. A cop did this? He should be behind bars." "He's one of their own," Maya muttered bitterly. Who's going to hold him accountable? Ethan stopped pacing and knelt beside her. We're not letting this slide. The next day, Maya submitted a formal complaint against Jack Harris at the police department. She filled out the forms meticulously, detailing the attack and providing the badge she had found. The officer behind the desk barely looked at her as she spoke. "We'll look into it," he said dismissively, filing her report without so much as a nod of acknowledgement. Days passed with no response. Maya's frustration grew, but it turned to unease when the first anonymous text appeared on her phone. "Drop the complaint, or you'll regret it." Her chest tightened as she stared at the message. The next day, another text arrived. "You don't want to make enemies." Maya showed the text to Ethan that evening. He grabbed her phone, his face pale with anger. "They're trying to intimidate you. We need to go public with this." "And risk everything?" Maya snapped. "What if they come after us?" Ethan leaned against the counter, his jaw clenched. "They already are." The tension between them grew in the following days. Maya became increasingly irritable, her frustration spilling into their conversations. One night, as they sat at the dinner table in strained silence, Ethan hesitated before speaking. "There's something I need to tell you," he said cautiously. Maya put down her fork, sensing the weight in his tone. "What is it?" "I have investments in the police department," Ethan admitted, his words measured. "Not directly, but through a fund that supports their operations." Maya's chair scraped loudly as she pushed back and stood. "You're joking." "It's not what you think," Ethan said quickly. "It's just business." "Business? You're funding a corrupt system." Maya's voice rose, her anger sharp. "Do you realize what you've been enabling?" "I didn't know," Ethan protested, his voice strained. "I swear, Maya, I didn't know things were like this." "But you benefited from it," she shot back, her eyes blazing, "while people like me are being brutalized in the streets." Ethan stepped closer, reaching for her arm. "Listen to me. I'm on your side. Whatever you need, I'll help you fight this." Maya pulled away, her voice dropping to a cold edge. "If you're serious about that, then start by cutting ties with them." "I will," Ethan said, his tone earnest. "I'll pull my investments. Just tell me what else I can do." Maya's glare softened slightly, but the wound between them remained fresh. "You want to help? Then don't hold me back when I go after them." That night, Maya sat alone in their home office, staring at the police badge she'd picked up after the attack. The crest etched into it felt significant, but its meaning eluded her. She began searching for any information she could find on Harris and his connections. Hours later, she stumbled across an old article about a prominent family that had long funded the local police force, the Harris family. Her stomach churned as she read about their influence, their name repeatedly tied to questionable policies and whispered allegations of corruption. "This isn't just one bad cop," Maya murmured to herself. "It's a whole system protecting him." She leaned back in her chair, the weight of the revelation pressing down on her. If she wanted justice, she would have to tear down the wall shielding Harris, and that meant exposing everyone behind him. Maya's anger hardened into resolve as she uncovered the Harris family's grip on the police department. This was no longer just about her attack. It was about dismantling a corrupt system. Maya sat at her desk, flipping through the files Ethan had reluctantly provided. Financial records, property deeds, and reports painted a damning picture. The Harris family wasn't just influential. They were deeply entrenched in the city's power structure. For decades, they had funneled money into the police department, buying loyalty and control. Decisions about promotions, budgets, and even investigations had their fingerprints all over them. "This isn't just about one officer," Maya muttered. "They're running the entire show." Ethan entered the room, his face tense. "Maya, you've been at this for hours. You're digging into dangerous territory." "That's the point," she shot back without looking up. "These people think they're untouchable. Someone has to expose them." "I know you're angry," Ethan said, his tone measured, "but you're putting us at risk. If you keep pushing, they won't just come after you. They'll come after both of us." Maya slammed the folder shut, finally looking at him. "They already came after me. Or have you forgotten the bruises on my face?" "I haven't," Ethan said firmly. "But this isn't just about you anymore. You're targeting people who have resources, connections. You don't think they'll retaliate?" "Let them try," Maya said, her voice cold. "I won't let fear stop me." Ethan ran a hand through his hair, frustration bubbling over. "This isn't just fear, Maya. It's common sense. Do you really think you can take on an entire system alone?" "I'm not alone," she snapped. "At least, I thought I wasn't. But if you're too scared to stand with me, say it now." The room fell into an uneasy silence. Ethan's jaw tightened, and without another word, he left. Hours later, Maya was driving home from the library, her mind replaying their argument. Her phone buzzed with a notification, another anonymous text. You're making a mistake. Drop it while you can. Before she could respond, the sound of a car accelerating caught her attention. She glanced in the rearview mirror to see a familiar police cruiser behind her. Jack Harris. The cruiser's lights flared, but this wasn't a standard traffic stop. Harris pulled up dangerously close, his headlights flashing as if to blind her. Maya's pulse spiked as she gripped the wheel tighter. "What the hell are you doing?" she hissed, her voice trembling. Harris's voice barked through the loudspeaker. "Pull over, Dr. Carter. Let's have a chat." Maya didn't stop. Adrenaline surged as she pressed harder on the gas, weaving through the sparse traffic. The cruiser followed, its siren wailing. In the distance, she spotted an alley. Without hesitation, she veered sharply, her tires screeching as she turned into the narrow lane. Harris's car slowed, but couldn't follow her. She kept driving until she reached a crowded parking lot and stopped, her chest heaving as she tried to catch her breath. Her hands trembled as she called Ethan. "Jack Harris just chased me down," she said, her voice shaking. "What? Are you okay?" Ethan asked, panic lacing his voice. "I'm fine, but I can't keep doing this alone," she said. "I need legal protection." The next morning, Maya met with Rachel Moore, a sharp, no-nonsense attorney who had built her career taking on powerful adversaries. "You've got a hell of a case," Rachel said, after Maya explained everything. "But you're up against more than just one bad cop. This could get ugly." "I don't care," Maya replied. "I need someone in my corner who isn't afraid of ugly." Rachel leaned back, studying her. "All right, first step, we build a solid case. We need more evidence, more witnesses, and airtight protection. This won't be quick or easy, but if you're in, I'm in. I'm in," Maya said without hesitation. With Rachel's support, Maya began reaching out to others who could help. She knew she needed more allies to take on the powerful Harris family and the system they controlled. Maya sat across from Rachel Moore in the lawyer's small but meticulously organized office. Rachel had a reputation for taking on powerful figures and winning, and her no-nonsense demeanor gave Maya confidence. "You're not just dealing with a dirty cop," Rachel began after hearing the details. "This is systemic. If we're going after them, we need to be strategic and relentless." "I'm ready," Maya said firmly. Rachel leaned forward. "I'll help you build this case, but we need more evidence. You're going to need allies, people willing to speak up." The next meeting brought Maya face-to-face with Emma Lane, an investigative journalist known for exposing corruption. Emma wasted no time diving in. "I've covered stories like this before," Emma said. "Cops like Harris don't operate alone. If we dig deep enough, we'll find a trail. Financial records, backdoor deals, maybe even other victims." "Let's start there," Maya said. "People need to see the bigger picture." Together, the trio began the arduous task of gathering evidence. Rachel reached out to potential witnesses, while Emma chased leads through her network. Maya, though exhausted from reliving her trauma, threw herself into the work. In the coming days, they interviewed several people who claimed to have been victims of Jack Harris or others like him. Each story revealed a pattern: intimidation, false charges, and even physical violence, all swept under the rug. One man recounted how Harris had planted evidence on him during a routine traffic stop. Another woman described being threatened into silence after filing a complaint. "This isn't just corruption," Maya said during a late-night meeting at Rachel's office. "It's a machine, and Harris is just one cog." Rachel nodded grimly. "We need proof to back up these stories. Without it, their testimonies won't hold." Emma chimed in. "I've been digging through police records. There's a disturbing number of cases where complaints against Harris were closed without investigation. I'm working on getting the documentation." The more they uncovered, the more dangerous things became. One afternoon, Ethan called Maya, his voice edged with panic. "I just found the car," he said. "Someone slashed the tires. It wasn't random." Maya's stomach dropped. "It's him, isn't it?" Ethan didn't answer immediately. "You need to be careful, Maya. He's not going to stop at intimidation." The warnings escalated quickly. That evening, as Maya reviewed witness statements at home, she heard a noise at the back door. She grabbed her phone and crept into the hallway, heart pounding. The sound of footsteps receded before she could confront anyone, but the message was clear. The next morning, they found the window latch broken. Nothing was stolen, but the violation was chilling. "We can't let this scare us off," Maya said to Ethan. "It just proves we're getting close." Rachel agreed. "This is a scare tactic, but if we back down now, they win." As the team pressed on, Maya uncovered something that sent shockwaves through their efforts. She found a set of financial records buried in public filings, donations, payments, and contracts tied to the Harris family. "They've been funding the department for decades," Maya explained to Rachel and Emma, pointing to the highlighted entries. "This is how they've kept control. Promotions, cover-ups, everything." It's all in here. Rachel scanned the documents, her expression sharpening. This changes everything. If we can prove their financial influence, we can connect it to Harris's actions and expose the whole system. Emma's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and swore under her breath. Harris just filed a harassment complaint against you, Maya. He's claiming you've been stalking him. Maya laughed bitterly. He's trying to discredit me before we can go public. Rachel stood, already pulling out her laptop. Let him try. We'll counter this with evidence. Get ready, because things are about to get messy. That night, the team finalized their strategy. They would present the financial documents alongside witness testimonies to expose the Harris family's stranglehold on the department. Maya felt a mixture of dread and determination. We're making the first move, she said. Let's make it count. With the financial records and witness statements in hand, Maya and her team prepared to go public, knowing they would face retaliation but determined to push forward. Emma Lane's article went live at dawn, and by midday, the city was on fire with discussion. The headline alone demanded attention. Officer Jack Harris, a cop protected by corruption? The article detailed Maya's assault, witness testimonies, and the Harris family's financial grip on the police department. It was a scathing expose, and the response was immediate. Maya watched the online reactions from Rachel's office. Social media erupted with hashtags like Coach Justice for Maya and Doctors End Police Corruption. Within hours, protesters began gathering outside the police headquarters, demanding accountability. They're finally paying attention, Maya said, her voice a mix of relief and determination. Rachel nodded. But Harris won't sit quietly. Expect retaliation. That retaliation came faster than they anticipated. By evening, a counter-narrative emerged. Local news channels aired a statement from Harris's lawyer, accusing Maya of orchestrating the assault for attention. She's manipulating the system, Harris claimed in the interview. Those tattoos? They're meant to provoke. She's been looking for trouble, and now she's dragging my name through the mud. Maya clenched her fists as she watched the broadcast. He's painting me as the villain. Ethan put a reassuring hand on her shoulder. The people who matter will see through his lies. Will they? Maya snapped, pulling away. This isn't just about me anymore. It's about every victim he's silenced. And now he's trying to silence me too. Rachel paced the room, her mind racing. We need to counter this immediately. Emma, can you release follow-up pieces with more evidence? I'm already on it, Emma said, typing furiously on her laptop. The stress took its toll on Maya. The weight of public scrutiny, the smear campaign, and the relentless fight for justice left her feeling cornered. Ethan tried to reassure her, but even his calm presence couldn't ease the tension. I can't do this forever, Maya admitted one night as they sat in their living room, the protests outside audible through the windows. It feels like the harder we push, the stronger they fight back. Ethan leaned forward, his tone firm. You're not alone in this. I'm with you, and so are Rachel and Emma. The public is rallying behind you. Don't let him win by breaking you down. His words resonated, but the tension between them was palpable. Maya felt torn, grateful for Ethan's support, but resentful that his ties to the police had made their fight even harder. 2 days later, a breakthrough arrived in the form of a USB drive. It was delivered anonymously to Rachel's office, accompanied by a note. The truth always finds a way. The drive contained a video recorded inside a police precinct, showing Harris in a heated discussion with 2 high-ranking officials. Their conversation was damning. We can't let this get out of hand, one official said. If Maya Carter keeps pushing, it'll bring attention to the whole system, Harris responded, his tone dripping with disdain. She's just another loudmouth with a grudge. I'll handle her the same way I've handled the others. The video ended with one of the officials saying, "Make sure there's nothing left to trace back to us." Maya watched the video in stunned silence. This is it, she finally said, her voice steady. This proves he's not just a bad cop. He's part of a corrupt network. Rachel's eyes gleamed with determination. We need to use this. In court, in the media, everywhere. This could blow their whole operation wide open. Emma was already drafting her next article. If we release this now, we'll force their hand. They won't be able to hide anymore. Do it, Maya said. They wanted a fight. Let's give them one. With the video in hand, Maya and her team prepared to present it as the centerpiece of their case, knowing it would ignite even greater opposition, but confident that the tide was turning in their favor. The courtroom buzzed with tension as Maya Carter took the stand. All eyes were on her, supporters and skeptics alike. Maya sat tall, her bruises long-healed, but her resolve stronger than ever. Rachel Moore stood beside her, calm and composed as she addressed the jury. Dr. Carter is here to recount in detail the night she was attacked by Officer Jack Harris. Her testimony will reveal not just a singular abuse of power, but the rot within the system that protects him. Maya gripped the edges of the stand, inhaling deeply. I was driving home after a long shift, she began. When Officer Harris pulled me over, it seemed routine at first, but his focus wasn't on my driving. It was on my tattoos. He called them gang signs and accused me of being a criminal without cause. Her voice didn't waver as she described how the encounter escalated. He grabbed me, threw me against my car, and punched me in the face. I didn't provoke him. I didn't resist. He attacked me because he could. Murmurs rippled through the room. Rachel motioned toward the courtroom's large screen. Let the jury see for themselves. The video, anonymously sent to Rachel's office, began to play. The grainy footage showed Harris in the precinct, speaking with senior officers. His sneering tone and dismissive comments about Maya echoed through the room. She's just another loudmouth, Harris said on the recording. We'll handle her the same way as the others. The video concluded with one of the officials instructing Harris to ensure nothing could be traced back. The jury's faces tightened, and the spectators whispered in shock. The footage was damning. As Rachel returned to her seat, Harris's defense attorney, Philip Conrad, rose. He approached the stand with calculated steps, his expression sharp. Dr. Carter, Conrad began, his voice oozing false courtesy, you say you were attacked unprovoked. Yet isn't it true that your tattoos have caused misunderstandings in the past? Perhaps you've had confrontations because of them? Maya narrowed her eyes. My tattoos are cultural symbols. They don't justify violence. Conrad smirked. And yet, isn't it possible Officer Harris felt threatened? Could he have interpreted your symbols as gang affiliation, leading to a heightened reaction? His reaction was brutality, Maya shot back. He didn't just misinterpret, he abused his authority. Conrad leaned closer. And the video? How convenient that it surfaced just as your case gained media attention. Tell me, Dr. Carter, how much of this case has been orchestrated for publicity? Rachel stood abruptly. Objection. Baseless insinuations. Sustained, the judge said firmly. Conrad retreated but cast a final glance at Maya. No further questions, Your Honor. The courtroom break didn't ease the tension. Outside, the situation was even worse. A large crowd had gathered, Maya's supporters waving signs demanding justice, while a smaller but vocal group of Harris's defenders accused her of ruining a good officer's career. The shouting turned heated, and within minutes, fists flew. Maya and Rachel hurried to the courtroom window as the noise outside reached a fever pitch. A group of men wearing shirts emblazoned with "Support the Blue" lunged at protesters, holding signs for Maya. Chaos erupted. Police officers tried to separate the groups, but the damage was done. Maya turned to Rachel, her face pale. This is exactly what they want. To turn this into a spectacle. Rachel nodded grimly. And to intimidate us. Don't let it work. Inside the courtroom, tensions rose further. As witnesses took the stand, Rachel methodically dismantled the defense's claims. Witnesses detailed Harris's history of misconduct, painting a clear pattern of abuse and cover-ups. But as the trial pressed on, a chilling blow landed. Maya returned to Rachel's office after court to find Emma Lane pacing with a phone in her hand, her face ashen. What happened? Maya demanded. Emma hesitated, her voice shaking. One of our witnesses, Marcus Holt. He was found dead this afternoon. Maya's heart sank. Marcus was a former officer who had come forward about Harris's intimidation tactics. His testimony was crucial. How? Rachel asked, her voice sharp. Shot, Emma said. The police are calling it a random robbery, but it feels too coincidental. Maya clenched her fists. This isn't random. They killed him to scare us, and to silence him. Rachel's face hardened. We need to act fast. If they're willing to go this far, they'll come after us next. Maya nodded, her determination blazing through her fear. Then we fight harder. For Marcus. For everyone they've silenced. The murder of Marcus Holt fueled Maya and her team's resolve. As they prepared for the trial's next phase, they braced for the dangerous fight ahead. knowing the stakes had never been higher. The office was silent except for the low hum of Rachel's laptop. Maya stood frozen, gripping her phone. The news of Marcus Holt's death hit like a freight train. "This wasn't an accident," Maya said through gritted teeth. Marcus was silenced. Rachel leaned back in her chair, her expression grim. "We both knew they'd retaliate. But this..." She trailed off, then stood abruptly. "We need to assume they'll escalate. They're running out of ways to stop us." Emma Lane, seated in the corner, was pale but resolute. "Marcus had evidence. He told me he kept backups, documents. If we can find them, they'll be watching," Maya interrupted. "If Marcus had anything, they've already destroyed it." "We don't know that," Rachel replied firmly. "We'll keep digging, but you need to be extra careful from now on." Later that evening, as Maya drove home, her phone buzzed with an unknown number. She hesitated but answered. "Maya Carter," a familiar voice sneered. Her blood ran cold. "Harris." "Smart girl," he said. "I warned you to back off. Now look at what's happening." "People around you are dying." Maya's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "You're a coward," she spat. "Killing Marcus won't stop the truth." A dark chuckle came through the line. "We'll see about that. Drive safe tonight, Dr. Carter." The call ended, and dread settled in her chest. She glanced in the rearview mirror, catching sight of headlights trailing her too closely. Her heart raced. The car behind her sped up, nearly clipping her bumper. Maya pressed the gas, weaving through traffic. The car followed, relentless. She turned onto a quieter street, hoping to shake them off, but the headlights stayed locked on her. Panic turned to adrenaline as the pursuing car rammed her rear bumper, forcing her into a sharp swerve. "Damn it," she muttered, gripping the wheel tighter. Ahead, she spotted an exit ramp leading to an industrial area. With no time to think, she veered off the main road, her tires screeching. The car behind her followed, speeding up. As she entered the deserted area, her mind raced. The streets were lined with half-finished buildings and stacks of construction materials. It was dark, save for the glow of her headlights and the menacing car behind her. The pursuing car surged forward, trying to box her in. Maya swerved sharply, her car grazing a stack of metal pipes, sending them clattering onto the road behind her. Harris's voice rang in her ears from the phone call. "Drive safe tonight." She scanned the area ahead and spotted a construction site with open gates. A plan formed in her mind, desperate and risky. She slammed the gas and headed straight for the site. The car behind hesitated for a split second but followed, its tires kicking up dust as it entered the site. Maya navigated through the maze of machinery and debris, her heart pounding. She spotted a narrow gap between two stacks of concrete barriers, just wide enough for her car. She floored the accelerator and threaded through the gap, the scraping of metal on concrete jarring her teeth. The pursuing car wasn't so lucky. It clipped one of the barriers, spinning out of control and slamming into a pile of steel beams. The crash echoed through the empty site. Maya didn't stop to check the damage. She sped out of the site, her hands trembling as she navigated back to the main road. When she finally reached her driveway, she parked and sat in silence, her body shaking with adrenaline. Her phone buzzed again. She flinched, but saw Ethan's name on the screen. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice tight with worry. "They tried to run me off the road," she said, her voice trembling. "Harris and his thugs," Ethan cursed under his breath. "We're getting security. No arguments." For once, Maya didn't push back. That night, as she sat with Rachel and Emma, the reality of the situation weighed heavily. "This isn't just a fight for justice anymore," Maya said. "It's survival. We need to tighten security and bring more people into this." Rachel nodded. "We'll reinforce everything. But Maya, you can't keep doing this alone. We'll find more allies. Ones Harris can't intimidate." Maya met Rachel's gaze, her voice steady. "Good, because I'm not stopping until this is over." The message arrived on Maya's phone at midnight. "If you want the truth, meet me at the old warehouse on Harbor Street. Come alone." Ethan read the text over her shoulder, his face hardening. "This reeks of a trap." Rachel, sitting across the table, frowned. "They want to isolate you, make you vulnerable." "We can't let that happen," Emma chimed in. "If we don't go, we might miss a critical lead, but we're not sending Maya in alone. I'll go, and we'll record everything." Despite their reservations, they decided to meet the sender on their terms. Ethan insisted on coming, and Rachel ensured they were equipped with recording devices hidden on their clothes. At the warehouse, the air was thick with tension. The place was shrouded in darkness, the faint glow of streetlights casting eerie shadows across the rusted metal walls. Maya's pulse raced as they stepped inside, their footsteps echoing in the vast, empty space. "I don't like this," Ethan muttered, scanning their surroundings. Suddenly, the sound of a door slamming broke the silence. Jack Harris emerged from the shadows, flanked by two burly men. He held a pistol, his grin sinister. "Well, well, Dr. Carter," Harris drawled, his voice dripping with malice. "You just don't know when to quit." Maya stood her ground, her voice steady despite the fear creeping in. "You're scared. That's why you keep hiding behind threats and violence." Harris's grin faded, his eyes narrowing. "I'm not scared. I'm cleaning up a mess. And you're about to be history unless you drop this case." He raised the gun, pointing it at Maya. Ethan stepped in front of her instinctively. "Back off," Ethan growled. Harris sneered. "How noble. But this isn't a movie, hero. You don't win by playing the good guy." Rachel stepped forward, her hands raised. "Harris, think carefully. This is all being recorded. You pull that trigger, and you're done." One of Harris's men grabbed Rachel roughly by the arm, but before he could push her aside, Ethan lunged. The room exploded into chaos. Ethan tackled Harris to the ground, the gun skittering across the concrete floor. One of Harris's thugs threw a punch, but Ethan ducked and countered, landing a solid hit to the man's jaw. Maya scrambled for the gun, but the second thug grabbed her arm, twisting it painfully. She gritted her teeth and stomped on his foot, causing him to loosen his grip just enough for her to break free. "Get the gun!" Rachel shouted. Emma, clutching her camera, darted toward the fight, filming everything. Harris managed to shove Ethan off and reach for the gun, but Maya kicked it away at the last second. "Enough!" Harris roared, wiping blood from his mouth. He lunged at Ethan again, the two grappling fiercely. In the middle of the chaos, a voice rang out. "Stop!" Everyone froze. From the shadows, a young man in a police uniform stepped forward, his hands raised. "I'm James Parker. I'm here to talk, not fight." Harris's expression darkened. "You little traitor." James ignored him, turning to Maya. "I've been watching this unfold. I know what Harris and his people have done. I have evidence, bank records, emails, everything you need to expose the corruption." "You're lying," Harris spat, his voice shaking with rage. "Parker, if you don't walk out of here now, you're finished." James squared his shoulders. "I'm already finished. The minute I saw what you did to her and others, I knew I couldn't keep quiet." He gestured to Maya. "You've been braver than anyone I know. You deserve the truth." Harris snarled and lunged at James, but Ethan blocked him, landing a punch that sent Harris stumbling backward. "Don't touch him," Ethan growled, his chest heaving. James handed Rachel a flash drive. "Everything's on here. Take it and go." "What about you?" Maya asked, her voice urgent. James hesitated. "I'll buy you time. Get this to the authorities before they can cover it up." The sound of sirens in the distance sent a wave of urgency through the group. Rachel grabbed Maya's arm. "We have to go. Now!" Harris cursed loudly as Ethan, Rachel, and Emma bolted for the door. They piled into Maya's car, adrenaline propelling them forward as the sirens grew louder. In the rearview mirror, Maya saw Harris and his men retreating, their plans unraveling. When they reached a safe location, Emma plugged the flash drive into her laptop. The files were explosive. Records of bribes, messages detailing cover-ups, and evidence tying Harris directly to senior officials. "This is it," Rachel said, her voice steady but filled with urgency. "This will blow the case wide open." Maya exhaled slowly, her hands trembling. "We have what we need. Now we make sure everyone sees it." With the evidence in hand and a whistleblower on their side, Maya and her team prepared to present the damning files in court, knowing it would escalate the danger but also bring them closer to justice. The courtroom was tense as Harris's team unveiled their surprise witness. A man named Brian Collins, claiming to be a former associate of Maya, took the stand. He leaned back confidently, his voice calm but calculated. "Maya Carter and her husband, Ethan, have been fabricating this entire story," Brian declared. "They're using it to discredit the police for personal gain. They even paid me to create false evidence." Gasps echoed through the room, followed by murmurs of confusion. Maya's jaw tightened, her fists clenched beneath the table. Rachel Moore shot to her feet. "Your Honor, we request immediate cross-examination. This witness's testimony is fabricated and unverifiable." The judge nodded. "Proceed." Rachel approached Brian with a razor-sharp focus. "Mr. Collins, you claim Maya paid you to create evidence. Can you provide proof of these transactions?" Brian smirked. "It was all in cash. Smart move on her part." Rachel didn't flinch. "And yet you have no documentation, no witnesses to these supposed meetings. Isn't it true you were recently fired from your last job for falsifying records?" Brian's smirk faltered. "That has nothing to do with this." "It has everything to do with this," Rachel shot back. "You're a known liar, brought here to distract from the real evidence against Jack Harris." The tension was palpable. The jury's eyes darted between Rachel and Brian, who began to fidget under her relentless questioning. Harris, seated at the defense table, scowled. His attempt to discredit Maya had begun to crumble. The trial break brought little relief. By the time Maya and her team left the courtroom, the internet was flooded with articles attacking her character. Headlines read, "Dr. Carter's Vendetta Against Law Enforcement," and "Hero Cop Targeted by Radical Activists." The articles twisted her story, painting her as a fame-seeker exploiting the system. Social media was ablaze with mixed reactions. Supporters rallied behind her, but critics were louder, demanding she drop the case. At the hospital, the smear campaign took its toll. Maya's colleagues, once her staunch allies, now greeted her with suspicion. During a tense meeting, Dr. Reynolds, a senior surgeon, confronted her in the break room. "Maya, I'm hearing things," he said, his tone sharp. "People are saying you're using this case to make a name for yourself." Maya stared at him, her patience fraying. "What people are saying is based on lies, and you know it." Reynolds crossed his arms. "All I know is that this hospital is under scrutiny now because of you. Patients are asking questions. Maybe you should have kept this fight out of the spotlight." "That's exactly what they want," Maya snapped. "They want me to back down, to stop fighting. And if you can't see that, you're blind to the truth." The room fell silent. Maya stormed out, her frustration boiling over. Later that night, Maya and Ethan were jolted awake by the piercing scream of their fire alarm. Smoke seeped under their bedroom door as the smell of burning wood filled the air. "Get up!" Ethan shouted, pulling Maya out of bed. The hallway was thick with smoke. Ethan grabbed a fire extinguisher while Maya dashed to the security panel to check the camera feed. Her stomach sank. 3 masked figures were fleeing into the night, leaving a trail of gasoline cans behind. "This was deliberate," Maya said, coughing. "Let's go, now!" Ethan yelled, pulling her toward the door. The fire had spread rapidly, engulfing the living room. Flames licked at the walls as they navigated their way out. Outside, the neighbors had gathered, pointing and shouting as the fire department arrived. Maya watched her home burn, a mix of fear and fury coursing through her veins. "This is Harris," she muttered. "He's trying to scare us into silence." Ethan wrapped an arm around her shoulders, his jaw clenched. "It won't work. We're not backing down." The next morning, sitting in Rachel's office, Maya made a decision. "They want us scared and isolated," she said. "We need to flip the narrative. Let's go public with everything. The evidence, the threats, the arson. If they're going to fight dirty, we fight louder." Emma Lane, ever the journalist, nodded. "A press conference. We air it all. It's risky, but it could turn the tide." Rachel agreed. "We'll need to be strategic. Present the strongest evidence first. Focus on Harris and his network, not just your personal experience." By evening, the team had organized the event. Maya stood at the podium, flanked by Rachel, Ethan, and Emma. Reporters crowded the room, their cameras trained on her. Maya began, her voice unwavering. "For months, I've fought against a system designed to silence people like me. Officer Jack Harris is not just a bad cop. He's a symptom of corruption that runs deep in this city." She presented the evidence. The flash drive from James Parker, the video of Harris's threats, and documents linking Harris to senior officials. Each piece was met with gasps and furious typing from reporters. "Last night, my home was set on fire," Maya continued. "They tried to kill me and my family. but I'm still standing. And I'm here to say, I will not be silenced. The room erupted in applause. The press conference sent shockwaves through the city. Public opinion began to shift. Protests grew larger, demanding Harris's immediate suspension and an investigation into the police department. Meanwhile, Harris's defense team scrambled to respond. They doubled down on their smear campaign, but the evidence against him was undeniable. As Maya prepared for the trial's next phase, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. The stakes were higher than ever, but so was her determination. The press conference set the stage for a dramatic shift in the case, as public outrage and mounting evidence forced powerful figures to confront the corruption they had long protected. The courtroom was a crucible of tension, packed with spectators, journalists, and activists. All eyes were on Maya Carter, seated at the plaintiff's table, and Jack Harris, whose defiance radiated like a storm cloud. This was the pivotal moment in the battle for justice, where the evidence, the lies, and the truth would collide. The press conference had already sent shockwaves through the city. Public outcry over the video of Harris threatening Maya in the warehouse, coupled with the financial documents implicating him and his allies, had created immense pressure on the police department. Yet Harris remained defiant, leaning on years of entrenched corruption to shield him. Rachel Moore began the day by calling Harris to the stand. The room fell silent as he approached the witness box, his movements deliberate, his demeanor calculated. He raised his hand to swear the oath, but his gaze never left Maya. Rachel wasted no time. Officer Harris, you've been accused of assault, corruption, and intimidation. Let's start with the video submitted as evidence. It shows you threatening Dr. Carter with a firearm. Can you explain your actions? Harris smirked, tilting his head. That video is misleading. I was there to warn her. She's been stirring trouble, accusing good officers of things they didn't do. The gun was for my protection. Rachel's expression was calm, but her tone was sharp. So, pointing a loaded weapon at an unarmed woman is what you consider a warning? Harris shifted in his seat. She was out of control. People like her don't respect authority. Someone needed to put her in her place. The jury's eyes widened at his words, and a murmur rippled through the spectators. People like her, Rachel repeated, leaning closer. What exactly do you mean by that, Officer Harris? He hesitated, realizing too late that his words had betrayed him. People who think they can undermine the law. Rachel pounced. And yet, the evidence shows it's you undermining the law. Shall we discuss the financial records tying you to bribes and illegal payments? The defense attorney interjected. Objection, Your Honor. These records are circumstantial and irrelevant to the specific charges of assault. The judge waved it off. Overruled. Continue, Miss Moore. Rachel turned back to Harris. Let's address the financial records. Over $200,000 funneled to your personal account from shell corporations linked to your brother. How do you explain that? It's none of your business, Harris snapped, his composure cracking. Rachel's voice cut through his anger like a blade. It's entirely my business, Officer Harris. These funds coincide with dates when allegations against you and your department were quietly dropped. Isn't it true you used these payments to cover up misconduct? Harris stood abruptly, his fists clenched. You don't know what you're talking about. The judge slammed the gavel. Officer Harris, sit down. One more outburst and you'll be removed from this court. Harris dropped back into his chair, seething. Rachel stepped away, satisfied that the jury had seen his true nature. During a recess, Maya and her team regrouped in a quiet conference room. Ethan squeezed her hand. You're doing great. He's losing it. Rachel nodded. He's unraveling, but don't underestimate him. They'll try something desperate. Her prediction proved correct when the defense introduced their surprise witness. Daniel Briggs, a self-proclaimed private investigator. Briggs took the stand with a casual confidence that set Maya's teeth on edge. I was hired by Dr. Carter to fabricate evidence, Briggs began, glancing smugly at the jury. She wanted to take down Officer Harris at any cost. Maya's breath caught in her throat. This is a lie, she whispered to Rachel. Rachel rose to cross-examine. Mr. Briggs, you claim Dr. Carter hired you. Do you have any proof? Emails, text messages, receipts? Briggs shrugged. She paid in cash. Smart move, really. Rachel tilted her head, feigning curiosity. And how do you explain these bank records showing a $50,000 payment to you from an account linked to the Harris family? Was that cash too? Briggs's smirk faltered. I don't know what you're talking about. Rachel held up a document. This transfer happened 2 weeks ago, right after you agreed to testify. Coincidence? Briggs stammered, his confidence crumbling under Rachel's relentless questioning. That's irrelevant. Rachel turned to the jury. This man, a known liar, wants you to believe he was paid nothing by the Harris family while accusing Dr. Carter of fabricating evidence. Who do you trust? Briggs's credibility was shattered, and the jury seemed to shift visibly in Maya's favor. As the trial neared its conclusion, Harris grew increasingly desperate. During a recess, he approached Maya in the hallway, his expression twisted with fury. You think you've won? He hissed. This isn't over. You'll regret coming after me. Maya stood her ground, her voice cold. You've already lost. You just don't know it yet. Court officers quickly intervened, pulling Harris back, but his threat lingered in the air. The defense's last gambit came on the final day of the trial. They presented an alleged email from Maya to Emma Lane, instructing her to doctor the warehouse video. The courtroom buzzed with whispers as the email was displayed. Maya's hands clenched into fists. It's fake, she said to Rachel. Rachel stood. Your Honor, we request immediate forensic analysis of this email. It's clearly fabricated. The judge granted the request, and the trial was adjourned while the email was analyzed. Hours later, the forensic expert returned with the findings. This email is fraudulent, the expert announced. The metadata indicates it was created on a device registered to Officer Jack Harris. The courtroom erupted. Harris's face turned red, and his lawyer slumped in defeat. After hours of deliberation, the jury returned. The foreperson stood, her voice steady. In the matter of Jack Harris, we find the defendant guilty on all charges. Cheers erupted from Maya's supporters, and tears welled in her eyes. The months of fear and struggle had finally paid off. But Harris wasn't finished. As officers approached to take him into custody, he lunged at Maya, shouting incoherently. Ethan stepped in front of her, bracing for impact, but court officers subdued Harris before he could reach them. You'll regret this, Harris screamed as he was dragged away. Maya's voice was steady. Not as much as you will. The courtroom victory felt monumental, but Maya and her team barely had time to savor it. Jack Harris's chilling threat echoed in her mind, a foreboding reminder that his network of corruption wouldn't crumble quietly. Just as they were preparing to leave the courthouse that evening, chaos erupted. The first sign of trouble came as a loud crash reverberated through the courthouse. Shouts followed, and panic spread like wildfire. Maya and Ethan were in a private conference room with Rachel and Emma when a bailiff burst in, pale and breathless. Harris's men are here. They've barricaded the exits and are demanding access to the evidence room, he said. Maya's heart raced. The evidence. They're going to destroy everything. Ethan moved to the door. We need to get you out of here now. Before they could act, the lights flickered, and the fire alarm blared. Smoke began to waft through the corridors, a clear diversionary tactic. Rachel grabbed Maya's arm. Stay close. We can't let them get to you or the evidence. As they moved cautiously toward the nearest exit, armed men blocked their path. One of them sneered, You thought this was over. Harris sends his regards. Ethan stepped in front of Maya, his fists clenched. If you want her, you'll have to go through me. The man smirked. With pleasure. The confrontation erupted into violence. Ethan lunged at the leader, knocking the gun from his hand. They crashed into a desk, scattering papers and sending a lamp crashing to the floor. Two more men charged forward, but Ethan held his ground. He grabbed a chair, swinging it with precision, taking one down. The other tackled him, and they grappled, fists flying in a brutal struggle. Run, Maya! Ethan shouted as he threw a wild punch, buying her a moment to escape. But Maya didn't move. I'm not leaving you! Rachel and Emma pulled her back as the skirmish intensified. Ethan managed to land a final blow, leaving the attackers groaning on the floor. He turned to Maya, his face bloodied but determined. Let's go, he urged. As the group moved toward the evidence room, Maya realized the building's chaos was part of Harris's plan to obliterate the proof against him. If he succeeded, her months of work would be for nothing. We can't let them destroy the files, Maya said, her voice resolute. Rachel nodded. We'll hold them off. Go secure the evidence. Maya, clutching Emma's hand, sprinted down the hallway. Smoke thickened, and distant gunshots echoed through the courthouse. They reached the evidence room, where a security officer stood, nervously gripping a baton. We're here for the case files on Harris, Maya said urgently. They can't be lost. The officer hesitated, but another loud bang spurred him into action. Follow me. They entered the secured room, where boxes of documents and digital drives were stored. Maya grabbed the critical files while Emma backed up digital copies onto a portable hard drive. Suddenly, the door burst open. Another of Harris's men stormed in, brandishing a crowbar. Hand it over, he barked. Emma stepped forward, clutching the hard drive. Over my dead body. The man lunged, but Maya ducked and swung a heavy binder, striking him in the ribs. Emma followed with a kick to his shin, and the man crumpled to the ground. Maya breathed heavily, clutching the files. Let's get out of here. As Maya and Emma made their way back, they encountered more chaos. Harris's men had cornered Rachel and Ethan in the lobby, where a standoff was unfolding. Harris himself stepped forward, a smug grin on his face. You're all so predictable. Did you really think you'd win? Ethan glared at him. You're done, Harris. This is your last desperate act. Harris raised a gun, pointing it directly at Maya. Maybe, but I'll take her down with me. Before he could pull the trigger, the sound of shattering glass echoed through the room. James Parker and a SWAT team rappelled through the courthouse windows, guns drawn. Freeze! Drop your weapon! Parker shouted. Harris hesitated, his hand trembling. For the first time, his confidence cracked. You're surrounded, Harris, Parker continued. It's over. Harris snarled, but dropped his gun as the SWAT officers advanced, restraining him and his remaining men. Maya clutched Ethan, her legs weak with relief. They came just in time. Parker approached, his expression grim but supportive. We've got everything under control. You're safe now. In the aftermath, Harris and his accomplices were taken into custody, facing an expanded list of charges, including conspiracy, assault, and attempted destruction of evidence. The files Maya had saved proved crucial in linking Harris to higher-ranking officials, triggering a wave of investigations into police corruption. At Harris's sentencing hearing weeks later, the courtroom was packed once again. This time, the atmosphere was one of resolution. The judge listed his crimes methodically, concluding with a lengthy prison sentence. As Harris was led away in handcuffs, he cast one last glare at Maya. You'll regret this. Maya didn't flinch. I already regret not standing up sooner. But this ends now. With Harris behind bars, Maya and Ethan turned their attention to systemic change. Working alongside Parker, Rachel, and Emma, they helped draft proposals for police reform, ensuring accountability and transparency. Their fight wasn't over, but they had won a crucial battle. For Maya, it wasn't just about justice for herself, but for everyone who had suffered under a corrupt system. As she stood before a crowd at a rally months later, Maya spoke with conviction. This isn't just my victory. It's ours. Together, we can build a future where justice isn't just a promise, but a reality. The cheers that followed were deafening, a testament to her courage and determination. Maya and Ethan shared a quiet smile, knowing they had turned their pain into power. The courthouse victory and Harris's sentencing marked a turning point, but Maya Carter knew the battle was far from over. The revelations of systemic corruption had ignited a nationwide movement, and the momentum couldn't be squandered. In the weeks that followed, a task force was established to address the failings exposed during the trial. Maya worked closely with community leaders, policymakers, and ethical law enforcement officers like James Parker to draft comprehensive reforms. Key proposals included mandatory body cameras for all officers, an independent review board for misconduct cases, and transparency in financial dealings within the police force. Maya attended every meeting, her voice steady and uncompromising. These policies aren't just words on paper, she said during one heated debate. They're lifelines for communities that have been crushed by injustice. This isn't about punishing good officers. It's about holding bad ones accountable and rebuilding trust. While the reforms faced pushback from entrenched interests, the public outcry made resistance difficult to sustain. Protests continued to fill city streets, and Maya's name became synonymous with courage and resilience. A pivotal moment came when the city council passed the first wave of reforms. Maya stood alongside Parker as the mayor signed the legislation into law, cameras flashing around them. "This is just the beginning," Maya told reporters. "Real change takes time, but we've taken a crucial step forward." Maya and Ethan channeled the energy of the movement into action. They founded the Carter Initiative for Justice, a nonprofit dedicated to supporting victims of police violence and educating young people about systemic inequities. The organization quickly gained traction, offering counseling services, legal aid, and scholarships for students pursuing careers in social justice. Maya worked tirelessly, meeting with families, organizing workshops, and mentoring aspiring activists. One evening, Maya visited a community center to speak with local residents. The room was filled with a mix of anger, hope, and determination. A young woman stood up, her voice trembling. "Dr. Carter, how do we keep fighting when it feels like nothing ever changes?" Maya met her gaze, her voice firm but empathetic. "Change isn't easy, and it doesn't happen overnight. But every voice, every action, every step forward matters. Look around you. This room is proof that we're not alone. Together, we can build something better." Ethan, who had taken on a leadership role in the organization, worked behind the scenes to secure funding and expand their reach. He often reminded Maya of their shared purpose during late nights spent reviewing plans. "We're not just reacting to injustice anymore," he said. "We're creating a future where it doesn't have to exist." Despite the progress, Maya's work wasn't without its challenges. Former allies of Harris attempted to discredit her, spreading rumors and questioning her intentions. Anonymous threats continued to arrive, warning her to step back. Maya refused to be silenced. She addressed the attacks head-on during a press conference. "To those who think intimidation will stop me," she said, her voice unwavering, "know this. I've faced worse, and I'm still here. Your threats only fuel my determination to keep fighting." The crowd erupted in applause, bolstering her resolve. Ethan watched from the sidelines, pride and concern etched on his face. Emma Lane, the journalist who had played a pivotal role in exposing Harris, also stood by Maya's side. "They're scared," she told Maya. "And they should be. You've already changed the game." Months later, Maya stood before a massive crowd gathered in a city park. The air buzzed with anticipation as people from all walks of life came to celebrate the progress they had achieved together. Behind her, a banner read, "Justice for all, building a better tomorrow." Maya took a deep breath, scanning the faces of the crowd. She saw families, activists, and survivors, each person a testament to the strength of unity. "Thank you," she began, her voice carrying over the murmurs of the crowd. "Thank you for standing with me, for believing that justice isn't just a dream, but a necessity." She paused, letting her words sink in. "When I started this fight, I felt alone. I was scared, hurt, and angry. But today, I see an army of people who refuse to let fear or hatred define us. We've come a long way, but there's so much more to do. Together, we can ensure that no one else has to endure what we've endured. Together, we can create a system that serves and protects everyone equally." The crowd erupted into cheers, their energy palpable. Ethan joined her on stage, wrapping an arm around her shoulder. "We did this together," he whispered. Maya smiled, her eyes glistening. "And we're just getting started." As the event wound down, Maya stood at the edge of the park, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The fight had left its scars on her body, her heart, and her life. But it had also forged a new sense of purpose. James Parker approached her, a rare smile on his face. "You've inspired a lot of people, Maya, including me." Maya turned to him, her expression serious. "You've been a big part of this, James. Don't forget that." He nodded. "What's next for you?" Maya looked out at the city skyline. "We keep going. There's still so much to fix, so many people to help. But for the first time, I feel like we can actually make it happen." Maya and Ethan's journey wasn't over, but they had shifted the tide. The system that had once oppressed so many was beginning to bend under the weight of accountability. Their scars were a reminder of the cost of change, but their resolve was unbroken. As they walked hand in hand toward their car, Maya glanced back at the crowd dispersing behind them. Do you think we'll ever see the day when all of this is just a memory? Ethan asked. Maya squeezed his hand. Maybe not in our lifetime, but every step we take brings us closer. And that's enough for me. As Maya and Ethan's story closes this chapter, it leaves us with a powerful reminder. Change is never easy, but with courage and unity, it's possible. From standing alone to rallying a community, their journey is a testament to resilience and the power of fighting for justice. What do you think is the most important step in creating a fair and accountable system? Let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear your thoughts. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories like this. Together, we can keep the conversation going and inspire change.
The morning sun cast a soft, golden glow over the modest streets of Havenwood. It was one of those rare, peaceful mornings where everything seemed to move just a little slower. Martha Johnson clutched her worn Bible close to her chest, the leather cover scuffed from years of use, as she walked her usual route home from church. The smell of fresh-baked bread wafted from a nearby bakery, mingling with the faint sound of wind chimes hanging on the porch of a neighbor's house. Martha, an elderly black woman in her 70s, moved with the grace of someone who had weathered life's storms but remained unshaken. As she turned the corner onto Maple Avenue, she noticed a police car creeping slowly down the street. She thought nothing of it at first. It wasn't unusual to see patrol cars in the area. But this one slowed down almost to a stop as it approached her. The young officer behind the wheel stared at her, his eyes narrowed under the brim of his cap. She felt the weight of his gaze and instinctively straightened her posture, clutching her Bible a little tighter. The car came to a full stop, and the door swung open. Officer Derek Carter, a tall, broad-shouldered white man in his late 20s, stepped out. His uniform was crisp, his badge gleaming in the sunlight. But there was something about the way he moved, arrogant, entitled, that made Martha's stomach tighten. She had seen men like him before, men who wore their authority like a weapon. "Ma'am," Derek called out, his tone clipped and formal, though it carried an edge of suspicion. "Yes, officer," Martha replied, her voice calm but wary. "What are you doing here?" he asked, walking toward her with deliberate steps. Martha frowned, confused. "I'm walking home. Is there a problem?" Derek tilted his head, studying her as though she were an object to be examined. "This isn't exactly a neighborhood where you'd expect to see someone like you just strolling around. You got ID?" The words hit Martha like a slap. She blinked, momentarily stunned. "Someone like me," she echoed, her voice firm now. "Officer, I've lived in this neighborhood for over 40 years. My home is 2 blocks away." "Aha," Derek said, unconvinced. He crossed his arms, his stance widening as though he were preparing for a confrontation. "Well, I'm gonna need to see some identification. We've had reports of suspicious activity in the area." Martha's eyebrows knitted together in disbelief. "Suspicious activity? I just came from church. I'm holding a Bible, for goodness sake." Derek smirked, the corner of his mouth curling upward. "Look, ma'am, I'm just doing my job. You can either show me some ID, or we can take this downtown. Your choice." A small crowd had begun to gather on the sidewalk across the street. Neighbors peeked out from behind curtains, their faces a mix of curiosity and concern. A young man in a hoodie pulled out his phone and began recording. Martha noticed him out of the corner of her eye and felt a pang of embarrassment. "I don't carry ID when I walk to church," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "But I can give you my name and address if that helps." Derek sighed dramatically, as though she were wasting his time. "Yeah, that's not gonna cut it. You could be anyone." Martha's patience began to fray. "Officer, I am a 73-year-old woman walking home from church in my own neighborhood. Do I really look like a threat to you?" Derek's eyes flicked to the Bible in her hands, then back to her face. His smirk faded, replaced by a cold, hard look. "I don't know, ma'am. Maybe you're hiding something under that Bible. Or maybe you're casing houses. I've seen all kinds of tricks." Martha's jaw tightened. "This is harassment," she said, her voice rising. "And you know it." Derek stepped closer, invading her personal space. "Harassment?" he repeated, his tone mocking. Lady, you don't know the first thing about harassment. But if you keep running that mouth, you're about to find out. The crowd across the street murmured in disapproval. The young man with the phone shouted, "Hey man, leave her alone. She didn't do anything." Derek whipped his head around, his hand hovering near the holster on his hip. "Mind your own business," he barked. "This doesn't concern you." Martha took a step back, her heart pounding. She could feel the anger bubbling inside her, but she also knew that anger wouldn't help her here. She had to stay calm, had to be smart. "Officer," she said, forcing herself to sound composed, "please, let me explain." "Hands where I can see them." Derek interrupted, his voice sharp and commanding. Martha's eyes widened. "Excuse me. You heard me. Put the Bible down and raise your hands." Now, the absurdity of the situation hit her like a wave. Here she was, a church-going grandmother in her Sunday best, being treated like a criminal in broad daylight. She looked at the young man filming, his camera phone trained on her, and suddenly felt a surge of defiance. "No," she said quietly. Derek's expression darkened. "What did you just say?" "I said no," Martha repeated, her voice louder this time. "I will not be treated like a criminal when I've done nothing wrong." Derek's hand moved to his gun, and Martha froze. "Don't make this harder than it has to be," he warned. "Harder for who?" A deep voice cut through the tension. Everyone turned to see Marcus Johnson stepping out of an unmarked police SUV, his presence commanding and authoritative. His dark suit and polished shoes were a stark contrast to Derek's uniform. Marcus's eyes locked on Derek, then shifted to his mother. His face, usually calm and composed, was a mask of disbelief and fury. "Mama," he said, his voice tinged with both shock and concern. "Marcus," Martha breathed, relief flooding her. Derek looked between Marcus and Martha, confusion dawning on his face. "Wait. You two know each other?" Marcus ignored him, striding over to his mother. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice low but urgent. "I'm fine," Martha said, though her voice wavered. "But this officer seems to think I don't belong in my own neighborhood." Marcus's jaw tightened. He turned to Derek, his expression hardening. "Officer Carter, would you care to explain why you're harassing an elderly woman in broad daylight?" Derek's arrogance faltered. Sir, I didn't know she was." "You didn't know she was what?" Marcus snapped. "A citizen? A human being? Or is it just that you didn't know she was my mother?" Derek's mouth opened, but no words came out. Marcus stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous calm. "You're done. Turn in your badge and gun. Now." The crowd erupted in cheers and applause, but Marcus didn't hear it. His eyes were fixed on his mother, who stood tall despite the ordeal. "Mama," he said softly, "let's get you home." Martha nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "Thank you, son." As Marcus escorted her away, Derek stood frozen, the weight of his actions, and their consequences, finally sinking in. The viral video of the confrontation on Maple Avenue spread like wildfire. Within hours, it was everywhere. Social media platforms, local news stations, and even national headlines. The footage, shaky but clear, captured every humiliating detail. It showed Martha Johnson standing firm, refusing to bow to Officer Derek Carter's baseless demands. It showed Derek pulling his weapon. And then, it showed Marcus Johnson, the chief of police, stepping in and publicly firing one of his own men. By the next morning, Havenwood was abuzz. At the community center, in diners, and even in church basements, people debated the incident. To some, Marcus was a hero, a leader who had finally taken a stand against the kind of discrimination that plagued their community. To others, particularly within the police department, Marcus was something far less flattering, a traitor who had humiliated the force in public. Martha, however, wanted none of the attention. She sat at her kitchen table, the same table she had bought with her late husband nearly 4 decades ago, staring at her untouched cup of tea. The faint sound of voices from the television in the living room drifted into the kitchen. Local police chief Marcus Johnson made waves yesterday when he took swift action against Officer Derek Carter, who was caught on video threatening Johnson's own mother. Martha sighed and turned her head away, staring out the small window above the sink. The last thing she wanted was to become a spectacle. For years, she had dedicated herself to quiet acts of community service, organizing food drives, mentoring troubled teens, and hosting prayer circles for families in crisis. Her life had been steady and simple, until now. The sound of the front door opening snapped her out of her thoughts. Marcus stepped in, his tall frame filling the doorway. He looked exhausted. His usually sharp suit was wrinkled, and the knot of his tie was slightly crooked. "Mama," he greeted softly, closing the door behind him. Martha turned in her chair but didn't smile. "Marcus," she said, her voice gentle but tinged with concern. "You look like you didn't sleep." "I didn't," he admitted, setting his briefcase down by the door. "The department's been a mess since yesterday. I had to go to 3 different meetings just to deal with the fallout." Martha motioned to the chair across from her. "Sit. You look like you need a good meal." Marcus shook his head but sat down anyway, leaning his elbows on the table. He ran a hand over his face, and for a moment, he looked far older than his 44 years. "They're coming for me, Mama," he said finally, his voice low. Martha frowned. "Who's coming for you?" "The union. Some of the other officers. Even a few city council members," he said, shaking his head. "They're all saying I acted too quickly, that I embarrassed the department. They're calling it a PR nightmare." Martha folded her hands in her lap, watching her son carefully. "You did the right thing, Marcus. That man had no business pulling a gun on me, or anyone else, for that matter. If they can't see that, then shame on them." Marcus let out a bitter laugh. "You think they care about what's right? No. All they care about is protecting their own. That's the problem, Mama. I've been trying to fix it for years, but," he trailed off, staring at the wooden grain of the table. Martha reached out and placed her hand over his. Her touch was warm and steady. "Marcus, you've been carrying this fight on your shoulders for too long. You can't change everything overnight." "It's not just about me," he said, lifting his head to meet her eyes. "What happened yesterday wasn't just a bad cop making a bad call. It's the whole system, Mama. The way they're trained, the way they think, it's broken. And no matter how hard I push, it feels like I'm standing alone." Martha's gaze softened. "You're not alone, baby. You've got this whole community behind you. And you've got me." Marcus nodded but didn't respond. He looked down at his hands, calloused and weathered from years of hard work, and felt a pang of guilt. His mother had already been through so much in her life. The last thing he wanted was to drag her into his fight. As if reading his thoughts, Martha smiled faintly. "You know, this isn't the first time I've dealt with this kind of thing." Marcus looked up, confused. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, her fingers tightening slightly around the edge of the table. "Your father and we had our own run-ins with the police back in the day. It's part of why we moved to Havenwood. We wanted to give you a chance at a better life, away from all that." Marcus frowned. His father had passed away when he was still in his teens, but even before that, his parents had never talked much about their struggles. "Why didn't you tell me?" Martha shrugged. "What good would it have done? We made it through. That's what mattered." She paused, her eyes searching his. "But I see now that maybe we should have told you. Maybe you would have understood why this fight means so much." Marcus felt a lump form in his throat. He wanted to say something, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he reached out and took her hand, squeezing it gently. Before the moment could linger, the sound of a knock at the door interrupted them. Martha looked toward the hallway, frowning. Who could that be? Marcus stood up. "I'll get it." He walked to the door and opened it, revealing a young black man with a camera slung over his shoulder. He wore a hoodie and jeans, his hair neatly trimmed. Marcus recognized him instantly. It was the same man who had filmed the video of Derek's confrontation with Martha. "Chief Johnson," the man said, his tone cautious but firm. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I think we need to talk." Marcus's eyes narrowed slightly. "About what?" The man glanced over Marcus's shoulder, clearly nervous. "About the department. And about what's really going on behind closed doors." Marcus stepped outside, closing the door behind him. "Start talking," he said, crossing his arms. The man shifted uncomfortably. "I've been documenting police activity in Havenwood for months. Derek Carter wasn't the only one abusing his power. There's a whole group of them. I've got footage, records, everything. Marcus's stomach tightened. Why didn't you bring this to me sooner? Because I didn't think you'd care, the man admitted. But after what you did yesterday, I think maybe you're different. Marcus studied him for a moment, weighing his words. Finally, he nodded. Come back tomorrow with everything you've got. If you're telling the truth, we'll handle it. The man nodded, relief flickering across his face. Thank you, Chief. As he walked away, Marcus stood on the porch, his mind racing. The storm was far from over, and now it seemed even bigger than he had imagined. When he walked back inside, Martha looked up at him, her expression questioning. Who was it? Marcus hesitated before answering. Just someone with more fuel for the fire. Martha's face tightened, but she didn't press. She simply reached for her cup of tea and took a slow sip. Then I guess we better get ready, she said quietly. Marcus nodded, his jaw set. Yeah, Mama. We better. The next morning, Marcus sat in his office at the Havenwood Police Department, staring at a stack of reports he hadn't touched. The room felt unusually quiet, as if the weight of the previous days had silenced everything around him. Even the usual background noise of ringing phones and murmured conversations seemed muffled. His department was in chaos, and he could feel it. He had walked in that morning to stares that lingered too long, to whispers that stopped as soon as he turned a corner. He leaned back in his chair and rubbed his temples, his thoughts racing. Firing Derek Carter had been the right thing to do, there was no question about that. But the fallout was proving worse than he'd anticipated. Union leaders had already sent a strongly worded email questioning his authority and accusing him of being rash. Officers he'd once trusted were treating him with thinly veiled hostility. And now, this young man, what was his name again? Caleb? Had come forward with accusations that made his department's problems seem even more insidious. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Marcus straightened up and called out, "Come in." The door opened, and Caleb stepped inside, a large backpack slung over one shoulder. He looked nervous, but there was a determination in his eyes that Marcus respected. "Chief Johnson," Caleb greeted, his voice steady despite his obvious discomfort. "Caleb, right?" Marcus asked, gesturing for him to sit. "Yeah," Caleb said, dropping his backpack on the floor and taking a seat across from Marcus's desk. "Thanks for meeting with me." Marcus leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "You said you had something to show me. Let's see it." Caleb nodded and unzipped his backpack, pulling out a laptop and a thick folder filled with papers. "I've been tracking misconduct in your department for a while now," he began. "At first, it was just little stuff, officers stopping people for no reason, treating certain neighborhoods like their enemy territory. But then I started noticing patterns. The same names kept coming up. Derek Carter was one of them." Marcus's jaw tightened. "Who else?" Caleb opened the folder and slid a stack of documents across the desk. "These are incident reports, internal complaints, and even some emails I managed to get my hands on. There's a group of about 5 officers who've been working together. They call themselves the Hunters. Their whole thing is targeting specific people in the community, mostly young black men, and trying to catch them in any kind of illegal activity, no matter how small." Marcus flipped through the papers, his stomach churning as he read. The reports painted a damning picture: fabricated charges, excessive use of force, and racial slurs casually thrown into written accounts. His own department, the one he had spent years trying to clean up, was rotten to its core. Caleb spoke again, his voice quieter now. "There's more. I've got video footage of some of their stops. They're not just profiling people, they're brutalizing them. And they've been covering for each other the whole time." Marcus's grip on the papers tightened. "You're saying this has been going on under my nose?" Caleb hesitated. "I don't think you knew. But a lot of people did, and they looked the other way." Marcus sat back in his chair, his mind reeling. This wasn't just about Derek Carter. This was bigger, deeper. And if he didn't act now, he would be complicit in the very system he had sworn to change. Later that day, Marcus sat with his mother at the dining table, the weight of the new revelations pressing heavily on him. Martha watched him in silence, waiting for him to speak. "I don't know how this happened, Mama," Marcus finally said, his voice heavy with frustration. "I thought I was making progress. I thought I was fixing things. Martha reached across the table and placed her hand over his. You're one man, Marcus. And one man can't fix a system that's been broken for generations. But I'm the chief, he said, his voice rising. It's my job to make sure this doesn't happen. And now I find out there's a whole group of officers in my department doing this, hurting people, terrorizing them, and I didn't even see it. Martha's gaze softened. You saw enough to act when it mattered. And that young man, Caleb? He came to you because he believes you'll do the right thing. That's more than most people in your position can say. Marcus looked down at the table, his thoughts swirling. The thing is, Mama, Caleb's evidence is solid. If I move forward with this, it's going to tear the department apart. The union will fight me. The city council will pressure me to bury it. And those officers, they won't go quietly. Martha nodded slowly. So you're asking yourself if it's worth it? Marcus didn't respond. He didn't need to. The answer was written all over his face. The next morning, Marcus called an emergency meeting with his senior staff. As they filed into the conference room, he could feel the tension in the air. Some of them avoided his gaze, while others stared at him with open hostility. Once everyone was seated, Marcus stood at the head of the table, a stack of Caleb's documents in front of him. He took a deep breath and began. I've called this meeting because some serious issues have come to my attention, he said, his voice steady but firm. I have evidence that a group of officers in this department has been engaging in misconduct, racial profiling, excessive force, and falsifying reports. And I intend to deal with it. A murmur spread through the room, and one of the officers, Captain Jenkins, leaned forward in his chair. Chief, if you're talking about Derek Carter, that situation's already been handled. No need to drag this out. I'm not just talking about Carter, Marcus said, his tone sharp. This goes deeper. And I'm not going to stand by and let it continue. Jenkins frowned. With all due respect, Chief, this department is already under enough scrutiny. If you start a witch hunt, it's only going to make things worse. Marcus's eyes hardened. What's going to make things worse is pretending there isn't a problem. We can't fix this department if we don't acknowledge what's broken. Another officer, Lieutenant Perez, chimed in. Chief, if you go public with this, the union's going to push back hard. They'll paint you as the bad guy. I don't care, Marcus said firmly. I didn't take this job to protect my image. I took it to protect this community. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. The room fell silent, the weight of Marcus's words settling over them. He knew he was making enemies, but he also knew he couldn't back down. That evening, as Marcus sat in his office, his phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Caleb. There's one more thing you should see. Meet me tonight at the community center. Marcus felt a knot form in his stomach. He grabbed his coat and headed out, the sense of foreboding growing with each step. Whatever Caleb had to show him, it would either solidify his resolve or make his fight even harder. When he arrived at the community center, Caleb was waiting with a laptop. His expression was grim. What is it? Marcus asked. Caleb hesitated before pressing play. The video that filled the screen was grainy but clear enough to recognize the faces of the officers involved. They were laughing, taunting a young man they had pinned to the ground. One of them was Derek Carter. But what struck Marcus the most wasn't the brutality, it was the voice of the man behind the camera, the one egging them on. It was Captain Jenkins. Marcus's blood ran cold. This wasn't just about a few rogue officers. This was a conspiracy, and it went higher than he'd ever imagined. The fallout from the confrontation on Maple Avenue was growing faster than anyone had anticipated. What began as a viral video had now evolved into a national conversation. News crews camped out in front of the Havenwood police station, microphones thrust toward anyone wearing a badge. Activists organized rallies outside City Hall, their chants echoing through the downtown streets. And within the department, the atmosphere was growing more toxic by the day. Marcus sat in his office, staring at the stack of complaints on his desk. The investigation into Derek Carter's misconduct had opened a floodgate. Dozens of complaints were being unearthed, most of them buried under years of inaction and bureaucratic red tape. Many of the names on the complaints belonged to officers Marcus worked with every day, men he had once considered trustworthy. "Chief," said his assistant, Paula, stepping into the office cautiously. She was holding a folder, her face tight with worry. "You might want to see this." Marcus sighed and leaned back in his chair. "What now?" Paula hesitated before handing him the folder. "This came in from Internal Affairs. It's about Derek Carter. His file. It's worse than we thought." Marcus opened the folder, his eyes scanning the pages. His jaw tightened as he read. Derek had a history of excessive force complaints, 6 in total. One of them involved a teenage boy who had been hospitalized. Yet somehow, none of these incidents had resulted in disciplinary action. Instead, Derek had been quietly shuffled between departments, his record conveniently sanitized. "Why am I only seeing this now?" Marcus asked, his voice sharp. Paula shifted uncomfortably. "Because someone's been covering for him. And not just him. There's a pattern, Chief. A lot of these guys have records that were edited." Marcus slammed the folder shut, his frustration boiling over. "Who's responsible for this?" Paula glanced over her shoulder, as if checking to make sure they were alone. "We think it goes all the way up to Deputy Chief Randall." The name hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. Randall was one of the most senior officers in the department, a man Marcus had known for years. He had always been a staunch defender of the status quo, but Marcus never imagined he would go so far as to protect abusive officers. Before Marcus could respond, his phone buzzed on the desk. He glanced at the screen and saw a name that made his stomach tighten: Anthony Lewis. Marcus hesitated before picking up. "Hello, Chief Johnson." Anthony's voice came through the line, calm but firm. "We need to talk. In person." Marcus frowned. "About what?" "About your department. And about your father." The mention of his father caught Marcus off guard. "What do you know about my father?" "More than you think," Anthony said. "Meet me at the community center. I'll explain everything." Before Marcus could respond, the line went dead. At the community center, the tension was palpable. Anthony stood by a folding table covered in documents, his arms crossed as he watched Marcus approach. Martha sat nearby, her expression unreadable. She had insisted on coming, though Marcus wasn't sure why. "What's this about?" Marcus asked, his voice curt as he approached Anthony. Anthony didn't respond immediately. Instead, he picked up a piece of paper from the table and handed it to Marcus. It was a copy of a police report, dated 1985. Marcus's eyes scanned the document, his heart sinking as he read the details. The report described an incident in which a young black man had been arrested on false charges. That man's name was David Lewis, Anthony's father. "My father spent 2 years in prison because of this," Anthony said, his voice steady but filled with anger. "All because your father didn't show up to testify on his behalf." Marcus looked up sharply. "What are you talking about?" "My father was." "Your father was supposed to be a witness," Anthony interrupted. "He saw what really happened. He knew the charges were bogus. But when the time came, he didn't show. And my father paid the price." Martha shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "Anthony, that's enough," she said quietly. "No, it's not," Anthony shot back, his gaze fixed on Marcus. "He deserves to know the truth." Marcus looked between the two of them, his mind racing. "Mama, is this true?" Martha's shoulders slumped. She looked down at her hands, wringing them nervously. "Your father, he wanted to testify. He knew what they were doing to David was wrong. But we got threats, Marcus. Real threats. People showed up at our house in the middle of the night. They told us if he went to court, they'd come after you." Marcus felt a cold knot of anger twist in his chest. "So he just let it happen. He let an innocent man go to prison." "He was trying to protect his family," Martha said softly. "It wasn't an easy decision. But we did what we thought we had to do." Anthony stepped closer, his voice rising. "And in the process, you destroyed my family. My father lost everything, his job, his reputation, his freedom. And you want me to believe that's justified because you were scared?" Marcus held up a hand. "Enough," he said firmly. He turned to Anthony, his expression unreadable. "What do you want from me?" "I want accountability," Anthony said. I want you to fix what your father broke. This department isn't just corrupt, it's been corrupt for decades. You think firing one officer is going to change anything? It's not enough. Marcus clenched his jaw. You think I don't know that? You think I'm not trying? Then try harder, Anthony shot back. Because right now, all I see is another man in a badge trying to protect his own. The words stung more than Marcus cared to admit. He looked at the documents spread across the table, complaints, affidavits, and internal memos, all pointing to a culture of systemic abuse. Finally, he nodded. I'll look into it, he said quietly. Anthony narrowed his eyes. You'd better do more than look, Chief. You've got a chance to do something real here. Don't waste it. Later that evening, Marcus sat in his office, staring at the photo of his father that hung on the wall. For years, he had idolized the man, seen him as a pillar of strength and integrity. But now, that image felt fractured, incomplete. He thought about Anthony's words, about the anger and pain in his voice. He thought about his own failures, the compromises he had made to survive in a system that seemed designed to resist change. Finally, he picked up the phone and dialed Paula's extension. Get me everything we have on Deputy Chief Randall, he said. And pull the personnel files for every officer under his command. I want to know exactly who we're dealing with. Paula hesitated. Are you sure, Chief? This could get messy. Marcus's jaw tightened. It's already messy. Let's clean it up. The protests outside the Havenwood Police Department grew louder by the day. By now, they weren't just about Derek Carter or the incident on Maple Avenue. They were about decades of unchecked abuse, systemic corruption, and the deep wounds left by a system that claimed to serve and protect but too often did the opposite. Marcus Johnson stood by the window in his office, looking down at the crowd below. Signs bobbed in the air, justice for all, end police abuse, hold them accountable. He could hear the chants faintly, even from this high up. Behind him, Paula stood with a grim expression. Chief, the mayor called again. She wants to know what your plan is. Marcus didn't turn around. Tell her the same thing I told her last time. The plan is to clean house. And it starts today. Paula hesitated. You know they're going to fight this, right? The union, the council, even some of the officers who haven't been implicated. They're going to make this as ugly as possible. Marcus finally turned to face her, his expression hard but resolute. Let them. I didn't take this job to keep the peace. I took it to make things better. If that means tearing the whole thing down and rebuilding it from scratch, so be it. Paula nodded, though her worry was clear. The press conference is in 20 minutes. Are you ready? Marcus's eyes flicked back to the window, where the protesters were chanting louder now. I've been ready for this my whole life. The conference room at City Hall was packed. Reporters jostled for position, their cameras flashing as Marcus stepped up to the podium. Martha was seated in the front row, her presence a quiet but powerful reminder of why this fight mattered. Anthony was there too, standing in the back with his arms crossed. Though he didn't trust Marcus completely, he couldn't deny the man had taken bold steps since their confrontation at the community center. Marcus adjusted the microphone and took a deep breath. Thank you all for being here today, he began, his voice steady but firm. Over the past few weeks, Havenwood has been at the center of a national conversation about policing in America. And for good reason. The incident involving Officer Derek Carter and my mother, Martha Johnson, was not an isolated event. It was a symptom of a much larger problem. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the room. For too long, this department has operated with impunity. Complaints of misconduct were ignored, bad officers were protected, and the community we swore to serve was left to suffer the consequences. That ends today. The room buzzed with murmurs, reporters furiously scribbling notes. As of this morning, Marcus continued, I have placed Deputy Chief Randall on administrative leave, pending a full investigation into his role in covering up misconduct within the department. Additionally, I have authorized the release of all internal complaints filed over the past 10 years. These records will be made available to the public, because transparency is the first step toward accountability. A hand shot up in the crowd. Chief Johnson, do you have evidence of Randall's involvement? A reporter asked. Marcus nodded. Yes, we do. And let me be clear, If this investigation confirms what we suspect, he will face consequences, just like any other officer. No one is above the law. The murmurs grew louder, but Marcus pressed on. I am also announcing a comprehensive review of our department's policies, training protocols, and disciplinary procedures. This will be conducted in partnership with community leaders, including activists like Anthony Lewis, who have been instrumental in holding us accountable. At the mention of his name, Anthony raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. But he didn't protest. "This is just the beginning," Marcus said, his voice rising with conviction. "Change won't happen overnight, and it won't be easy. But I promise you this, as long as I am chief of police, I will fight to make this department one that serves everyone, fairly, equally, and with respect." The room erupted in questions, but Marcus stepped back from the podium, signaling that he was done. He walked off the stage, his heart pounding but his resolve unshaken. Later that evening, Marcus sat on the porch of his childhood home. The sun was setting, casting the street in a warm, amber glow. Martha sat beside him, a cup of tea in her hands. "You did good today," she said, breaking the comfortable silence. Marcus shrugged. "We'll see. It's easy to talk about change. Making it happen is the hard part." Martha reached over and patted his hand. "You've already started. That's more than most people ever do." He looked at her, his expression softening. "Thanks, Mama. For everything." Martha smiled faintly. "You don't have to thank me, baby. I'm just proud of the man you've become." They sat in silence for a while, watching as the streetlights flickered on. Eventually, Marcus spoke again. "You think Dad would have been proud?" Martha didn't answer right away. She stared down at her tea, her face thoughtful. "Your father wasn't a perfect man, Marcus. He made mistakes. But he always wanted what was best for this family. And for this community." She looked up at him, her eyes glistening. "So yes, I think he'd be proud. Very proud." Marcus nodded, the weight of her words settling over him. A week later, Marcus and Anthony stood side by side on the steps of the community center, addressing a crowd of residents. They spoke about accountability, about the work still to be done, and about the importance of standing together, even when it was difficult. As they finished, the crowd erupted in applause. Martha watched from the sidelines, her heart swelling with pride. For the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful, not just for her son, but for the future of Havenwood. Change was coming. Slowly, painfully, but surely. And this time it felt real.